what is the situation of our caregivers of this particular bill, Mr. President?
First of all, among the many sectors of our workers, I believe that the caregivers sector is one of the most neglected sectors of our society. Similar to our kasambahays, they are in peculiar working conditions because most of them are working in the residences of their employers whose right to privacy are ensured. This makes it difficult to put boundaries on the scope and hours of work. Also, their work arrangements make them susceptible to being abused or even being exploited, Mr. President.
So if that is the case, Mr. President, how does the measure remedy the situation, Mr. President?
This measure seeks to provide protection to caregivers in the Philippines. It
Okay.
aims to provide legal basis to ensure that their rights are upheld, their welfare is protected, and their benefits are adequately provided, Mr. President. And it contains provisions such as the duties of the caregivers, their hours of work, minimum wage, leave, and other benefits and basic necessities. At the same time, it seeks to ensure that lawyers and private employment agencies are likewise protected by outlining the pre-employment requirements, the contents of employment contract, and the conditions for the termination of contract, Mr. President. And if you would notice, Mr. President, this is similar to the bill that I filed during the 16th Congress. It was passed here in the Senate and in the House. It was enacted already into law, the Kasambahay Bill, Mr. President.
So yes, Mr. President, I could see that this has been patterned after the Kasambahay Bill, especially on the requirement for a contract. I think that is a unique feature in the or a novel feature in the Kasambahay law, Mr. President, and
Yes.
we are retaining that in this particular bill, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President.
So, Mr. President, the kasambahay, when a person works within the household of an employer, I think there will be a presumption that that person, at the very least, is under a kasambahay arrangement. How about the caregiving arrangement, Mr. President? How will we know if a person has been hired as a caregiver? Mr. President.
One intention of this bill is to give clear distinction between kasambahay doing caregiving work and the caregiver, Mr. President. Kasambahay and their duties are defined under Republic Act number 10361, otherwise known as the Domestic Workers Act or Batas Kasambahay. If the kasambahay acquires NC2 for caregiving or becomes a licensed healthcare professional, he or she is entitled to the benefits provided under this bill. That means that he or she may enter into a contract with his or her employer as a caregiver and not as a kasambahay. It will be stipulated in the contract, Mr. President, that the service that will be rendered will be that of a caregiver, Mr. President.
So a caregiver who is the beneficiary of this measure is identified by the fact that that person holds a license, a particular license, Mr. President?
A caregiver, Mr. President, is defined under Section 3A of this bill. It refers to a person who renders caregiving services and provides personal care support and assistance to clients in private homes, nursing or care facilities, and other residential settings, as stipulated in Section 7 of this Act, such as those: number one, licensed healthcare professionals listed in TESDA as caregivers. Number two, any person duly assessed and certified by TESDA upon compliance of any of the following. Number one, graduate of a caregiving qualification who achieved the required competencies. Number two, graduate of allied healthcare courses of an education and or accredited training institution. And number three, practitioner or any person with prior learning and or experience who has undergone competency or portfolio assessment.
So, Mr. President, so a person's status as a caregiver is authoritatively given by a government agency, Mr. President?
Caregivers, Mr. President, are those assessed and certified by TESDA, Mr. President.
So the caregiver, for a person to claim to be a caregiver,
Must be assessed and
he
certified.
must be assessed and certified by the TESDA, or he or she is a licensed healthcare professional registered with the TESDA.
You're
So-
correct, Mr. President.
So, okay, in both instances, there is a TESDA participation or intervention, Mr. President.
Correct.
Unlike kasambahays, no? Kasambahays did not have any
No.
certification or registration with TESDA or any government agency. So,
No, you're correct, Mr.
okay
President.
po, sige. The problem with involving the TESDA, Mr. President, is that I have been informed that there are only a number of schools accredited by TESDA and allowed by TESDA, authorized by TESDA to accredit or certify caregivers or some of the courses that are given by TESDA.
Accredited by TESDA.
Yeah, I think these schools do not even number up to 20, Mr. President.
Ilan ba?
Mr. President, if I may, Mr. President, with the indulgence of our dear colleagues, considering that we have some information with regard to technical vocational schools offering caregiving NC2, Mr. President. In the latest data, 2022, Mr. President, there were about 22,287 enrolled students, of which 19,936 graduated and 19,783 were certified. But there are currently only 147 technical vocational schools, Mr. President, offering this particular course, Mr. President.
Mr. President, just to a follow-up question to our majority leader, when the school is authorized to offer a certain course like caregiving, the authority to issue certification is also automatic?
No, Mr.
yeah,
President.
that's what- yeah, Mr. President, so-
The TESDA's role, Mr. President, in fact, the bread and butter of TESDA is not to establish schools, but, Mr. President, the sole authority in technical vocational education to certify students, its students, Mr. President. So there are so-called assessment tools that TESDA is implementing with these technical vocational institutions, Mr. President.
And just to give additional information, Mr. President, well, we have 8 TESDA technical institutions providing training for caregiving NC2. And for assessment, for caregiving NC2, we have 12 TESDA technology institutions which serve as assessment centers. And these are private training and assessment centers, Mr. President.
So those are few in number, Mr. President. So 8 plus 12, 20. So I hope they are well distributed over the country, Mr. President. Taga Mindanao will have convenient access to all of these centers, Mr. President.
If you may ask how many tested accredited training centers nationwide, in training we have 340 private technical vocational institutions or TVI offering caregiving NC2. And as far as assessment is concerned, we have 87 assessment centers for caregiving NC2 as of March 31 of this year, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. So since these are, it would be the assessment center which will be critical. Without the assessment, there would be no certification by the TESDA. So I just hope that the 87 assessment centers are fairly and reasonably located in the Philippines, Mr. President, and they are not all concentrated here in the national capital region.
Scattered all around, no? For the information of the minority leader, it is scattered all around the country, Mr. President. In Region 1, we have 4, if I may, Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, La Union, Pangasinan. Region 2, we have 2, Cagayan and the province of Isabela. Region 3, we have 6 provinces of Bataan, Bulacan, Nueva Ecija, Pampanga, Tarlac, Zambales. Region 4A, which is Calabarzon, province of Batangas, provinces of Batangas, Cavite, Laguna, Quezon, and Rizal. Region 4B, Mimaropa, provinces of Occidental Mindoro, Oriental Mindoro, and Palawan. Region 5, provinces of Albay, Camarines Sur. Region 6, in Western Visayas, we have Aklan, Iloilo, and Negros Occidental. Region 7, we have Bohol, Cebu, and Negros Oriental. Region 8, we have Eastern Samar, Leyte, Western Samar, and Southern Leyte. Region 9, City of Isabela, Zamboanga del Norte, Zamboanga del Sur, and Zamboanga Sibugay. Region 10, we have Bukidnon, Camiguin, Lanao del Norte, Misamis Oriental. Region 11, we have Davao del Norte, Davao del Sur, Davao Oriental. Region 12, Socsargen, Sarangani, and South Cotabato. And the Cordillera Administrative Region, we have provinces of Abra, Benguet, Ifugao, Kalinga. Region 13, Caraga, Agusan del Sur, Surigao del Sur. And in the NCR, we have Kamanava, City of Manila, Pamamarisan, Pasmac, Pasay, Makati, Munti, Parañaque, Las Piñas, Taguig, Materos. Almost all the major cities have been covered, Mr. President.
Yes, from Mindanao.
Especially in Mindanao, we have 4 in Zamboanga Peninsula, 4 in Northern Mindanao, 3 in the Northern Mindanao and Davao, 2 in Socsargen, 2 in Caraga.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. Mahalaga kasi ito kasi from the definition of a caregiver, you cannot be a caregiver unless you have been assessed and certified by TESDA.
Yes, and Mr. President, if I may add, with the enactment of this bill, Mr. President, into law, we are expecting for more training and assessment centers for caregivers that will be established in various parts of our country, Mr. President.
As well as the institutions, siguro, giving the courses.
Assessment.
Iba pong assessment center from the institution giving the courses. Tama.
Yeah,
So,
kasama po yan.
so tama, because if this bill becomes a law, then we can foresee that we are encouraging, because of the protection being given to the profession or to the work, we're encouraging people to go into the said activity or the work, Mr. President. So Mr. President, ito lang yung tanong ko po, tanong din ng aking staff, kasi ang iba, for example, nurse na or doktor na, for some reason, sir, would rather perform caregiving activities. Does this person who was been trained in a more extensive manner still required to take the assessment,
No more, Mr. President.
certification,
No more, Mr. President.
Because what will that person use as proof that I'm a caregiver
His or her license from the PRC, Mr. President.
in his or her profession?
Yes.
So thank you for that clarification, Mr. President. So pero baka hindi siya covered, Mr. President, kasi sa section 3A, I and II. So if that is the flexibility that we want to enact, then maybe at the proper time, if we can review the wording and capture the scenario that we have just illustrated, Mr. President.
Maybe the period of amendment.
Yes, at the proper time,
Yes,
Mr.
at the proper
President.
time.
Just to be sure, Mr. President, even the nurse or the doctor's PT, Mr. President, registration with the TESDA will not be necessary?
If we are talking about the physical therapist, you will just enlist sa TESTA then to be reassessed, Mr. President.
What is the section applicable, Mr. President? Section 3AI. So registration is the word there. So that person needs to just register with the TESDA.
Yes, Mr. President. Any licensed healthcare professionals registered in TESTA as caregivers, Mr. President.
So that means to say that at any given time, TESDA must always have a database of all caregivers or all of those giving caregiving services, Mr. President. Ganun ang mangyayari.
Yes, Mr. President, I think it is included in the bill, Section 24, if I may read, Mr. President. Registry of Certified Caregivers. TESTA shall maintain a registry of certified caregivers that shall be made available to the public pursuant to applicable laws, rules, and regulations.
So, yes, Mr. President, but Section 3AI uses the word registered. It is 3AII which uses the word certified. So if our intention is that the database will capture both the registered and the certified, then probably at the proper time, if we could also improve the wording of Section 24.
Yes, Mr.
So
President.
basta,
I'm open to any amendment.
basta ang ending is that at any given time, TESDA knows the caregivers and all of those giving caregiving services, Mr.
Correct,
President.
Mr. President.
So, as of the moment, Mr. President, how many can we say are caregivers here in the Philippines, Mr. President?
Based on the data given to me by the TESTA, there are 145,342 caregivers who are NC2 holders from 2017 up to February of 2023 this year. This figure, however, is incomplete because it does not include caregiving practitioners who do not have NC2 and licensed allied healthcare professionals who are doing caregiving work, Mr. President. So that is just a ballpark figure, Mr. President.
Just to see if I understand this, Mr. President, this 145,000 plus caregivers, this would be the people who will fall under 3AII?
Yes, Mr. President.
And then those others mentioned by the sponsor, those who will fall under 3A subparagraph I?
Yes, Mr. President.
Sa paragraph I mentions any licensed healthcare professionals. What would be those others, Mr. President, who are not licensed healthcare professionals but rendering caregiving services, Mr. President? Is that possible or is that allowed?
Mr. President, according to those from TESTA, they do not have any data.
It's either you fall, a caregiver would either fall under 3AI and be a licensed healthcare professional. May meaning ito, di ba? It would be a PRC licensee holder. And then, if you are not that kind of a caregiver, you are under Section 3A, subparagraph II.
Yes,
So,
Mr. President.
yes, Mr. President. So, how about abroad, Mr. President? How many caregivers do we have working abroad?
We have 31,447 caregivers working abroad.
So,
Based
31,000.
on the data given to me by TESDA, this is given to us by the Department of Migrant Workers,
Yes,
Mr. President.
Let's
And this
just
around the globe, Mr. President, not only in the United States.
Yeah. Are those 31,000 plus caregivers working abroad potential beneficiaries of the bill? Kung maging law ito, meron ba silang mararamdamang benepisyo?
Wala, ano?
Wala, no?
Wala.
Wala
I don't
po.
think so, Mr. President.
Okay, so wala. So this is really meant for
For caregivers
working
working
in the Philippines.
Yes.
But I think in one of our discussions, Mr. President, the sponsor mentioned that the caregiver can benefit from the certification by using it abroad, just in case he or she wants to work abroad.
If the accepting country will require, then they have to enlist from the TESDA and get the certification from TESDA for them to work abroad if the accepting country would require them to have a certificate, Mr. President.
Has that been proven, Mr. President, in
Yes,
actual experience that a country has respected and accepted the TESDA certification that the person is a certified caregiver?
Yes, according to my staff here, it happened in Israel, Mr. President.
Okay, so at least good.
Yeah.
Okay, because with this law, Mr. President, since we will putting in rules, parameters, and regulations, we are in effect we are stricter in the regulation of the caregiver, then more trust would be put on our TESDA
Yes.
certification, Mr. President. So pwedeng makatulong po ito sa deployment.